It's a pleasure to be here on a school day. As much as I love taking professional development days, and as a little break to the classroom, I do miss my students. But it's a pleasure to be having this conversation and talking with people who are passionate about our kids in Texas, and knowing that teacher compensation is a lever that can be pulled to improve student outcomes. So my name is Chris Green. I'm a master teacher in San Antonio Independent School District. This is my second year at Rhodes Middle School. I teach 7th and 6th grade English language arts on the west side of San Antonio. I'll start by introducing our panelists, and then I have questions that we'll have each one of them share their expertise on. So we have Dr. Edwin Flores, who was a longtime trustee at Dallas ISD. We've heard a lot about Dallas ISD today and the amazing things that are happening there. We also have Holly here, Holly Eaton, who leads the Department of Professional Development and Advocacy at Texas Classroom Teachers Association. And we have Chad Aldeman, who is a principal at Bellwether Education Partners, where he has worked on the policy and thought leadership team. So I guess I'll start off by just having each panelist kind of create their own introduction and why they're here and why teacher compensation is important.
So thank you for having me, and God bless you for teaching in middle school. That is hard work. I'll tell you what, I couldn't do it. My name is Edwin Flores. I'm president of the Dallas School Board this year. I've been on the school board on and off, is probably the best way to describe it, since 2005. And when I was on the board my first time around, I helped lead the effort to develop our Teacher Excellence Initiative, what eventually was called the Teacher Excellence Initiative, which is our performance-based evaluation system, which then we hired a superintendent who would actually then take in a performance-based evaluation system and married it to a compensation system, which is what we call TEI in Dallas ISD, so that we can reward our greatest educators based on actual data and their performance in the classroom. And we can talk at length about kind of the effects, and I'm looking forward to doing that. But that is only one of the many initiatives that we have in Dallas ISD. We're very proud of the hard work of our students. We received a B grading from the TEA this year, based on our performance in the growth for our students. We educate 92% of our students are low socioeconomic status, which is a higher percentage than Detroit Public Schools, to give you an example. So I'm looking forward to being part of the panel. Thank you for having me.
Hello everyone, I'm Holly Eaton, and I've been advocating for teachers since 1995. That was my first legislative session. And as happens to some of us, they just go by so quickly, and we're almost facing another one. So 1995 was when the legislature decided to rewrite the entire education code. So it was quite a baptism by fire to become involved at that point. And I know that the question is centering around teacher pay and why it's so important right now. And my response to that is that the reason teacher pay has kind of reached this pitch point in terms of interest is that teacher pay has been declining when adjusted for inflation for the past 15 years. And in Texas, the decline is 2.4%. So teacher pay has not even been keeping pace with inflation. It's been declining. And then on top of that, you have the teacher pay penalty, which is the dynamic where a teacher is paid less than a comparable college graduate. And in Texas, it has reached an all-time high of 30%. So that dynamic has resulted in some pretty significant repercussions. For example, as of 2016, we've had a 48% decline in college graduate, or anyone enrolling in teacher preparation programs. And a national report from this year, when looking at the national decline in enrollment, which is 23%, noted that the deans of colleges of education pointed to the view that teaching is an undesirable career as the reason for this decline, likely based on low salary and lack of professional autonomy. And this view, this sort of dim view of teaching, is not just confined to college students, it also is prevalent in the American public. A PDK poll from this year, over half of the respondents said they would not encourage their children to go into teaching. And of those, 30% cited low salaries as the key reason for that. So teacher salaries are a major factor, obviously, in recruitment to the profession, but they're also a major factor in retention. And you know, the example we have of that, the repercussions there are we have 1 in 5 teachers in Texas leaving every year. So we're not only getting enough into the profession, we're losing them too fast to ever sort of make up the difference. And when the commissioner was presenting the statistic to the School Finance Commission recently, it led him to remark that when the largest share of the teacher workforce is a first-year teacher, that is not the sign of a healthy profession. So teachers routinely cite low salaries and poor working conditions as the reason they're leaving the profession. So obviously, again, teacher salaries play a significant role in both recruitment and retention. And really in this state, we've tried to address raising teacher salaries by not spending a whole lot. And with the size of our state and the size of our teacher workforce, I believe we have 340,000 teachers in the workforce, that's really just not possible. So in our view, what we need to do is raise base pay to competitive levels and to effectively address recruitment and retention before we can ever start talking about paying certain teachers more, high-performing teachers more, because they won't be there to pay.
Good afternoon. My name is Chad Aldeman. I'm a principal at Bellwether Education Partners. We're a national nonprofit dedicated to improving the lives of disadvantaged youth. I also run a website called teacherpensions.org, trying to raise awareness about how teacher pensions are structured. So we'll talk about that a little bit, but I want to give a few stats. We've already heard a lot from Edwin and Holly, but a couple things. The good news is Texas, in the long term, has improved teacher salaries. So in the 1970s, Texas was about 40th in the country in terms of average teacher salaries. In recent years, it's climbed up to 28th, so it's better. But I will say that Holly's exactly right, that over the last 10, 15 years, teacher salaries have not kept up with inflation. In Texas, I looked at the numbers today, over the last 10 years, they've lost about 2% to inflation over the last 10 years. That's not as bad as the national average. The national average is losing about 4% to inflation, but still it's not a good sign for Texas teachers' purchasing power. There are a couple other big trends that I want to talk about. One is over the long term, we've shifted more of teachers' compensation from base pay to benefit costs, and that has an effect on the attractiveness of the workforce in terms of teachers seeing base salaries. They don't see the cost of benefits. They also can't pay their mortgage. They can't pay their childcare on the cost of benefits, and so that's a real issue as well. And then I want to talk a little bit about drawing some numbers from the pension plan, a recent actuarial report from the pension plan. They do experience studies. They look at how Texas is doing over time, and they change their assumptions accordingly. And in their last assumptions, they had to lower their assumptions for how fast teacher salaries will grow, particularly for 0 to 10 years. They saw lower, slower salary growth than they expected, and so they had to drop that down. I think that's relevant here as well. They're also starting to see higher turnover rates than they had expected, and so people are leaving, especially again in the early years, faster than they anticipated, and that could, I think it's likely plausible that the salary is a big part of that as well. So I'll pause there with my opening remarks, and then we can dive into a conversation from there.
Sure. Excellent. So you know, each person explains kind of why this is an issue that should be talked about. So I guess the next question is, there are districts in the state that are incentivizing, teachers and incentivizing great teaching. So what can we do to kind of incentivize lawmakers to support school districts in providing different teacher compensation systems?
So I'll start. In the prior panel, they were talking about the question of accountability came up. And I think that this is one of those areas where I think Dallas has led the nation in not only developing its teacher evaluation system, but tying it to compensation in a way that's very accountable and it's very transparent. The way that we run our evaluation system, about 35% of it is student performance data for a good portion of the students. We also have a student survey, and then we have a number of spot evaluations, which also include the mandatory 1 hour, yearly evaluation that the state requires, so that there are many, many times during the school year that a teacher gets feedback about their performance and how they're doing. Now that also ties into how we pay them. Now Dallas also has one of the highest starting pays, not just in the state of Texas, but in the nation. I think adjusted for cost of living, we're the second highest in the United States, after New Jersey, I think. So we pay our starting teachers $51,000 a year. That's a starting, green behind the ears teacher. We are, of course, now in the process of asking the taxpayers of Dallas ISD to approve a tax ratification election, because we know that we do need to increase what we pay our teachers so that we can attract great talent to come work in Dallas, and so that it can support our TEI system. We can't pay everybody $90,000 a year, but the more that we have coming into the system, the more we'll have that number of teachers making that kind of pay. And so that is part of our long-term plan, at least for the next 5 years, and that's assuming that the legislature doesn't move at all. Now, if the legislature said, well, if you have this kind of system and you do have a way of rewarding your best and incentivizing them to stay, and from a teacher retention point of view, this is actually a really important data point, and I'll kind of stop with that, is that when we look at our teachers which are in the highest performance bands and getting our highest performance pay, we lose 1 or 2% of the teachers, and when you look at those, they're actually going into administration. So our retention rate at that top end is absolutely the best thing that's ever happened to students. So I'll stop with that.
Well, okay. First of all, I guess I want to make the point that differentiating pay is not a new concept. It's been around a long time, and we've certainly had a number of districts that have engaged in differentiated pay. Paying above the minimum salary schedule, for example, is a way of differentiating pay. And then, of course, it's, the stipends for serving in struggling schools or teaching shortage subjects or taking on leadership roles. All of those forms of differentiated pay have been around a long time. When you talk about the performance pay aspect of differentiated pay, that's also been around a long time in Texas too, and in the nation. In Texas, it started with a career ladder in the early 1980s, which probably there's no one left that's going to defend the career ladder. It was, by all accounts, a spectacular failure, followed by a series of state-level programs that weren't immensely successful in achieving their stated goals either. So I guess given that, and given that we have districts like Dallas that are engaging in these different forms of paying teachers, my hope is that the legislature would use those different sites, set up a process to use those different sites as a way of piloting what's out there, and then having those results externally evaluated so that we know the strength of the connection between what they're doing and what the outcomes are. Otherwise, we're just guessing. So that would be my recommendation before ever scaling anything up to state level.
Yeah, again, there's not much I can add. I'll say a few things, ways to think about it. We know that, pay is definitely a attractor to any profession, and we know also working conditions are a factor. It's not easy for a state to change working conditions. There might be particular policies that they can do, but it's not like they can increase one unit of working conditions. Working conditions mean different things to different people, whereas salaries are something, and compensation and budgets are something that policymakers do control. And so I would look at how to change that. And then think about how to direct resources at the biggest problems. So if you're seeing very high turnover in early years, that's the natural response, or you're having trouble attracting, I think the natural response should be, how do we get competitive salaries at the front end? Particularly, I think that backs up in the pension plan data, as that's what we're seeing, is higher turnover rates, not as fast of salary acceleration in those years. And then like once teachers start to age into the profession, they've made an investment, the district has made an investment on their behalf, and so they might stick around if they want to. I also think it's useful to track some of the differentials to know whether you're keeping the teachers that you want to keep. And so I think a state has a role in ensuring good data collection, not just overall retention rates, but retention rates by effectiveness and how well are various districts doing in that sense. Are they losing their highly effective teachers and principals to other fields? Are they losing them to other districts? And those are different responses in how we think about it. And the last thing I'll say is that we've seen in literature that direct payment is better than any sort of contingency or tax return or other types of things. There's a lot of movement to sort of hide extra pay for teachers through loan forgiveness or taxes or other things that comes late in the year, and it requires teachers to oftentimes fill out their forms or their taxes appropriately. And I think those are too hidden. Like a policy should be direct and upfront and predictable, or else it's not going to have the desired effectiveness.
That's great. So thinking about it at the state level, to increase teacher pay, especially for teachers that we are high performing and that have been teaching, demonstrating results. How can we support districts, or how could what is the way to share with the legislature that increasing teacher pay is that lever that can really change outcomes for students? Because I think that what you said is that Dallas is going to be doing a TRE, a tax ratification election. It's how can the state fund these things so districts don't have to be extremely creative in figuring out ways to keep their best teachers?
Well, so that's a great segue, and I completely agree with some of the things that have been said. So what we're doing in Dallas is, again, going forward with this tax ratification election, we want to reward our highest performing teachers. We have to pay our other teachers. Inflation, of course, affects everybody, you and me and everybody else. But we also want to focus on programs that work and actually improve student achievement, drive student achievement, transform student achievement. So if you look in Dallas at our Accelerated Campus Excellence program, this is a program where we took our improvement required schools, which is everybody who has them knows that these are schools, many of them stay on that same list for years and years and years. Now they'll be called F schools, I guess. We call them focus schools because we're blessed to be able to develop a locally adopted evaluation system in Dallas. But what we did is we took our improvement required schools and we took our TEI data, looked at our highest performing teachers, looked at our highest performing principals, because we also do a PEI, which is a Principal Excellence Initiative, and then said, we are going to incentivize teachers that want to go to these schools. So we'll select a principal, and then the principal gets to select who gets to be at the school, kind of one of these transformation models. But we pay each of those teachers $10,000 a year more to be able to come to that school. But the filter is you have to be high quality. We've now turned around every single school in the Dallas Independent School District that was improvement required, thanks to this system. Now we had, we were at 47 a couple years ago, then we were at 32, then we were at 13. This year we had 4, and these are 4 new schools. Not our old improvement required 4 and 5 schools. These are 4 new ones. We're focusing on them. We know what we need to do to turn those schools around. We have to maintain the focus and support at the other schools, because as soon as you pull the supports, guess what happens? Then those schools drop back into IR. We've known this. We've seen this many times. So thanks to our TEI and the ability to be able to incentivize with real money, not hiding it, not giving them, you're dead right. Real money. I think to most teachers, $10,000 is real money to be able to incentive, and it's opt-in. They choose to go to these schools and love those children and put great stuff in their brains. And let me tell you, we have turned those schools around in unbelievable ways. Just to stop, just one little factoid. Blanton Elementary School in the Dallas ISD last year outperformed one of the Highland Park elementary schools. These are schools that could not be more different. Blanton is a 99% low socioeconomic status school. Highland Park has no low socioeconomic students. And our school outperforms there in a second year of being part of ACE. So we're very proud of that, and it is thanks to TEI.
That's amazing.
I do think the notion of having your, best teachers or good teachers at the struggling schools is a worthy notion, certainly. And teacher equity, that kind of teacher equity, scenario has been around a long time. That's been a focus we've had for a long time. And as I said, districts do pay teachers to go to struggling campuses. I think there's more of a desire now to pinpoint exactly what it is, what combination of factors can take a struggling school and effectively turn it around. And Dallas has its program, its ACE model, and there's pockets around the country that are doing some things that try to address, getting good teachers to those schools and turning those schools around. And interestingly, the kind of those factors, I don't think anyone's pinned them down completely yet, but they often involve things like wraparound services and supports for families and students, early childhood education, which you heard the panel speak about earlier, the importance of that, extra counselors, extra instructional coaches, some more specialized personnel, and focused professional development. And those are all things that appear to be working in combination to help turn some of these schools around. Our concern in particular about performance pay is mostly centered on the measure used to determine it. And in that case, it's been student performance on standardized tests. And aside from the fact that only about 20% of teachers teach tested subjects, I know in Dallas, you have a whole bunch of tests, assessments of course progress. Those are standardized district level tests for every subject in order to have the data to assess which teachers are effective. But nonetheless, if you're looking at the state standardized test, only about 20% of teachers in Texas teach tested subjects. And then aside from that, you have the issue about using a measure for one purpose that it was designed for, or using a measure for a purpose for which it wasn't designed. So you have testing experts who said, look, a standardized test was designed to measure student performance. There's concerns about validity and reliability using those test results for one step removed, that being teacher performance. So, that's our main concern, is the measure that's being used. Not to say that teachers shouldn't be paid based on how well how much their students are learning. And there's promising, kind of initiatives being done around the country and even in Texas, trying to develop student learning measures that are a little more instructionally sensitive than a state standardized test. So, one of the criticisms about our state standardized test from it was a couple of years ago, a UT professor from UT testified at a House Public Ed Committee hearing and said, about 75% of the state test is test-taking skills in Texas. So the instructional sensitivity of that measure to what's actually going on in the classroom was very far removed. So I think, those are some of the concerns we have about performance pay. In the most recent study that was done on a large-scale performance pay initiative was the RAND study on the Gates Effective Teaching Initiative, and it used the performance pay approach, and it found that there were no measurable differences between the districts that use that approach in terms of student achievement, access to effective teachers, dropout rates, particularly for low-income and minority students, than for sites that didn't use that. So the authors of that study concluded that rather than focusing on teachers, which impact a very small percentage of student performance, perhaps we ought to have more states focus more on these other bigger levers that have more impact on student performance. And again, Those are things like early childhood education, small class sizes. I know at your ACE campuses you have smaller class sizes, 22 to 1, and more instructional coaches, more counselors, extended.
One more counselor. These are very small schools.
Yeah, small schools. But I'll tell you, one counselor can make a big difference in a school. So those are the kinds of facets that at least these authors suggested that be paid more attention to by states.
I can see, I'll frame mine as 3 different ways that I think states should think about compensation and teacher policy. One is getting the big picture funding issues right. So if the state has a big budget line item, making sure that the formula there is driving the results that you desire and the dollars are going to the places that need them the most, and then letting those districts and schools choose how to respond, whether it is class size reduction, whether it's pre-K, whether it's instructional supports, let them decide rather than trying to do that through state policy, and letting those districts decide locally. And then a second bucket I would say is, what are the school improvement funds that exist that are specifically designed for low performing schools, and how do you are those funds being allocated to the right schools? What are those schools using those funds for? Are they really being tied to evidence-based improvement efforts? Every state, including Texas, has 7% of their federal dollars that's designed for school improvement activities, and that money is then spread out to schools, and so that's a big lever for the state to exert its priorities. And then the third one, I think, is to support districts like Dallas to do more of what they want to do, that maybe don't have the startup funds that it takes to do those sorts of initiatives or other things like that, and help them design the systems that are fair for teachers, that are predictable, all the different policy checks that we already talked about, but letting districts design those and helping transition to over time. It's sort of like, when I was at the U.S. Department of Education, I worked on a federal program called the Teacher Incentive Fund. So I think the state could have something similar to try to get state districts to move in that direction. Again, there are a lot of implementation details, but things like getting more teachers compensated based on their overall evaluation ratings and principles as well, and incentivizing working in hard to staff schools and subjects, creating more demand in those areas, I think will be a big factor in terms of, even if you take performance off the side, if you got more people applying in those areas, it's likely to be more competitive, and then you're likely to get a better pool of candidates that are interested in working in those schools and subjects.
So the next question will kind of return to you, Chad, talking about teacher retirement. So what is the current state of TRS?
Yeah, I realize this isn't a pension panel, but I want to spend a little bit of time, and graphs really do tell it easier than I can say it. So I've prepared a couple graphs for you. Please bear with me. The first, before I turn to those, I'll just say that the TRS system is not a particularly generous plan. So in terms of actual benefits going to teachers, the state estimates that it's only about 2.5% of each teacher's salary going to teacher retirement benefits, which isn't very much if you think about like a typical 401k with a 3 or 4 or 5% match. Texas retirement system is actually worth less than that, and that's on average, and there's distributional issues as well, which I'm going to show you. And then I should also mention Social Security. So only about 14 districts here in Texas are participating in Social Security. That leaves the rest of them not participating, and so they're entirely dependent on TRS. And so if the system's not working well for them, they are very vulnerable to retirement insecurity issues. All right, so this is how assets accumulate in TRS for a 25-year-old entrant into the system. There's very little accumulation of retirement assets for someone who stays 5, 10, 15 years, and then there's a steady acceleration towards the back end. And this is what it looks like for new teachers hired as of 2014. I'm going to show you a graph in just a minute. It's actually changed significantly over time. It's a little bit better for someone who comes at later ages, if they start later, but it still has the same backloaded profile, and given when teachers are likely to turn over, it still has bad implications for the numbers of teachers who are left without adequate benefits. So here's, again, the same blue graph as the benefit line. The red line is the pension plan's assumptions for turnover, which are based on historical data. About half of Texas teachers leave within 8 years, and only less than 1 out of 5 will stay a full career. The ones who do stay a full career get that back-end peak, but that means not many people are staying that long. Okay, and then I mentioned that the plans have changed over time. So again, the solid dark line is for teachers hired more recently, after 2014, but there's been changes over time. They've actually gotten worse. And so teachers who entered the system at prior years had better benefits. It's the most recent one is the medium blue, and the farthest one away, who are the longest serving veterans in the classroom right now, have that very light blue line, if you can see it there. So that's just how it's looking. The state is also not paying as much as it should into the system, and so the funded ratios are getting worse over time, and that's likely going to have to make some changes to how the system is compensated as well.
So I guess my follow-up question on that, as a teacher myself, a young teacher who hasn't, who's not thinking about retirement currently, why should I be concerned? And then also, what in the short term or the long term should teachers be thinking about, knowing that this is true currently?
So it depends on whether you're in Social Security or not, but and it also depends on how long you're planning to stay. But let's say life happens and maybe you decide to leave teaching, you're likely gonna not leave the system with very good benefits, which means you'll have to either save more in the future, work longer, et cetera. So it's not setting you up for success. Even if you do stay and plan to stay for your full career, it's likely that the system is going to have to raise contribution rates, which means either the state is going to have less money to spend if they raise their own contribution rates, or if they raise your contribution rates, that means that you'll have less take-home pay from your salary. And so these are projections that are going to happen in the near future. The system is sort of vulnerable and fragile. If a market recession hit, then that's likely to accelerate those types of changes I've been talking about.
Did either of you want to add anything about?
No, other than, with pension systems are a benefit, and their purpose and design is to encourage longevity in the profession, and teaching is a profession, and it's not a drop-in and drop-out kind of job. So, it serves that role, but I do believe that there's some uncertainty among teachers now about the stability of the fund, given the recent changes that have been made. There's been some chipping away of benefits and some questions about the continued stability of the fund. So it's definitely an issue. And then the other aspect of TRS is TRS Active Care Insurance, which since its inception in 2002, the teacher's share of the premium payment, which has been increasing rapidly, is more than doubled, and the state's contribution has remained the same. So that's another big area of concern.
How are we on time? Good. Questions, or are we still early for that? We're good? Okay, excellent. So I guess my next question is about teacher compensation and also teacher retention, and thinking about how we can make it to where people who are considering teaching enter the classroom to kind of add diversity to our schools. How can that be part of what school districts and the state can make policy changes around? So, getting people who traditionally would not have considered teaching, into career pathways in education.
I'll start. So I'll be glad to start. So Dallas ISD also has a big program, but again, due to our size, we have some advantages that other school districts may not, but we are very heavily into growing our own. Our students are diverse. They're 92% minority, 92% poverty, so clearly it is a great pool of potential future teachers to draw from. We have approaching 50% English language learners in our district, which is also something we're very proud of. And because of our two-way dual language program and our dual language program district-wide that we've had since 2006, we're churning out a very large volume of biliterate individuals that are graduating from our schools, which makes them a fantastic pool to pull from. So with our pathways to technology and our early college high schools, which we now have in just about every one of our high schools that's not an international baccalaureate school, we have students graduating with 2-year associate's degrees, and this is, I think we're about 8,500 students this year. We'll add another 2,000 next year, and we have 2 dedicated schools where it's just teaching. And one of those we have, thanks to the state legislature, allows the community college district to actually give a 4-year degree now. And we're working not only with DCCC, but also with University of North Texas at Dallas, with a bilingual teacher pipeline. That it's basically our students getting the opportunity to get 2 years of college for free while they're our students. And basically, with the community college district and the Dallas Promise, I don't know if you all heard about the Dallas Promise, but it's also an opportunity for those students to finish their associate's degree, but then also go on to 4-year degrees, which is our future pipeline of teachers. I mean, we recruit very heavily. We have a very large starting pay as compared to our adjacent districts, and our pool is really, our teacher pool is really the state of Texas, not just the North Dallas area for Dallas. But we are investing heavily in these Grow Your Own programs. We make offers to teachers, before kind of the March-ish deadline when people are starting to think, well, I need a job. Well, we're making offers to our teachers as early as we can. These are individuals who are in schools of education getting teaching degrees. Of course, we do the You Teach program and all the other programs to get those pipelines of math, science, physics, chemistry, kind of high school level teachers that need to have the specialized degrees. So we are investing heavily in that. One area that I think Dallas has some progress that needs to be made is becoming a great place to work. And that's another thing that we're working on, is making it appealing so that people want to stay and work for us, because we are taking care of them, taking care of their benefits and all those things that they're part of living and being a working person. So we're working on that, not quite there yet, but we've made a lot of improvement there. But yeah, you have to grow your own. I think that is the one thing when we, for example, my daughter just graduated from high school, went to our famous Townview TAG, our Talented and Gifted High School, which was #1 in the nation 3 years in a row. They were third in the nation this year, but a handful of the teachers that teach there are former TAG students. So there is no question, and these are young people, these are people who are in there for the long haul. They're going to work hard. I was also on the board when we passed the largest Teach for America contract in the United States. It was a 5-year deal, largest at the time. Hopefully we still have one of the largest. It is a fantastic pipeline of teachers and of future talent. Guess what? The principal of Talented and Gifted is a former TFA'er. And you look at our leadership roles and the roles of individuals who are staying. So over 65% of our Teach for America core members stay in teaching. And many of them stay in Dallas ISD. So this is something we're focused on, is transitioning those. And that's one of our pipelines. It's not our only pipeline. So from those pipelines where we're getting kind of alternative students that have studied other things, our focus is making sure we convert them, and they're diverse. That's the other thing, that the Dallas core is very diverse, is that we're converting those into lifetime career educators and lifetime leaders and policymakers. We now have 2 former TFA members who are on our school board, Miguel Solis and Justin Henry. I know San Antonio ISD has
Steve Leschel.
Steve, yeah, he was my TFA fellow when he was in law school at SMU. So that's the kind of thing, investment, but we need to make sure that it's a great career and it's something that folks want to have and be part of for their entire life. I also wanted there was a statement made, I just want to correct one quick thing about our TEI. So our TEI, only 35% is student test scores. Our ACPs, our assessment of course progress, were actually developed way before the TEI. It wasn't developed for TEI. On the other hand, we use multiple measures of student test taking, in addition to the fact that 50% of the evaluation is based on in-person, multiple, between 8 and 16 in-person spot evaluation. So it is a robust system, and when we invited our big union, which is not TSTC, our bigger union is Alliance, they were invited to be at the table. All our unions were invited to be at the table, or teacher organizations. When we developed this system, unfortunately, most of them decided to stick their heads in the sand about this, and instead of being part of the solution, in many ways they were part of the problem. But I think that as our teaching corps, which is very, very low percent member, union members, realizes that our incentive pay system is something that long term is going to be to their benefit. So just wanted to clarify that.
I guess, so continuing on that, like how can, what types of things are out there in addition to, just higher starting salaries and not like things, where down the road you'll get this $2,000 back for your college. Like in what ways can we attract candidates that typically would not consider teaching and more diverse teacher candidates?
Well, I mean, I do think that and the research bears this out, when college graduates are looking for potential jobs to pursue, one of the things they look at is the salaries of those established in their career. And although there's been an increase in starting salaries, and districts have used that as a way to recruit teachers, not necessarily in Dallas, but in other districts, what that's resulted in is this compression of salaries, so that your veteran teachers who've been there a while, who are making literally maybe a couple thousand more than the teacher who just walked in the door, that's not necessarily a good morale booster or retention tool. So that's an issue that we feel does need to be addressed. In terms of attracting non-traditional candidates to teaching, I mean, we have more alternative certification programs in this state than I believe any other state in the country. Certainly more for-profit alternative certification programs. And ostensibly those were to produce non-traditional candidates who were more diverse and also who would fill subject shortage areas. But I'm not sure that that's necessarily been the case, and perhaps better attention could be paid to more purposeful preparation of teachers. And one of the things that I hear a lot is a closer partnership between school districts and the educator preparation entities that they're working with, so that they're more aligned on who they're producing and what their support looks like after they are prepared. Because, an ed prep program can't just usher in a teacher and wash their hands of them. There needs to be that continued support for the teacher. So the Grow Your Own initiatives, and the state has been focusing its Title II funds, federal Title II funds, and the legislative appropriation for teacher quality initiatives around this Grow Your Own program, and they've had a series of grants that have been given to districts in the recognition that it is important to introduce the career of teaching to students early on, perhaps in high school. I think it's a pathway I think it's a House Bill 5, there's a pathway, services pathway, and teaching is one of those strands that could be emphasized, just to give them exposure to that early on and start building up that support network for them so that they'll come and be a teacher in your district and stay there for a long time.
Yeah, a couple things. The diversity issue is a real issue, and it's an issue all across the pipeline. So there's the recruitment issue, but there's also other places as well. So we know that there's equity gaps in terms of college completion. There's equity gaps in terms of licensure rates. There's equity gaps in terms of hiring. So even after teachers are licensed, some districts are more likely to hire white candidates, for example. There was a study on where the school district that my daughter goes is Fairfax in Virginia, and Fairfax had a system that they were more likely to hire white candidates, even all other factors equal. And so the district has had to address that. And I think that if other districts did analyses like that, I bet they might discover certain other processes in place that are driving some of those gaps. We also know there's gaps in retention rates. And so a district, to work on their diversity issue, needs to work on all portions of their pipeline. They need to do data analyses. They need to figure out what it is. Some of the things that we've talked about already are like linking up with local preparation providers. Residency programs tend to have more diversity in them than other types of programs, and so there are places out there. Districts should want to do this on their own, not just as a large employer that wanting to reflect their community, but also there's lots of data out there that suggests that students do better when they are matched with teachers who look like them, both in terms of gender and race. And so there is an incentive that districts should have to address this. I don't know what will compel them to do that, but those sorts of analyses I think are good starting points for every district to know where their gaps are and where they can improve.
I guess, so my last question is, assuming that there is, that funding is not, there's nothing changed with funding for next year during the legislative session. If you had a magic wand to, do with what we currently have as far as funding, if you had a magic wand, what would you do with it to, utilize the state's funding of education in a more impactful way to better compensate teachers, and in that compensation of teachers, improve student outcomes?
Well, I can tell you what we're doing in Dallas. So what we're doing in Dallas is a very heavy focus, and I was able to watch the last panel, very heavy focus on early childhood. All our kids are full-time pre-K, K. We also go as young as 3-year-olds. We received some data from one of our pilot schools called Harlee, which is again a school where the faculty, the principal, every person in that building is not only diverse, but also highly focused on making sure that every single one of those kids is ready for third grade reading. And a number of other things. We have a social emotional learning policy in the district that we passed, which is district-wide, that applies to every single one of our schools. But in this particular school, what's really interesting, and it's a 3-year-olds until 2nd grade. And one of the things that the principal is focused on is, since they don't have to do high stakes testing, that principal is able to very particularly put strong teachers with certain groups of students, and being able, again, these are all diverse kids, these are all poor kids, and the faculty looks like them, which is fantastic. We were seeing in the data that was shown to us for reading readiness in 1st and 2nd grade, that over 90% of the kids were on track to be 3rd grade reading ready at the for it's not the meets, it's the level above it. Over 90% of the kids. Let me say that again. Over 90% of the kids. So don't tell me that just because they're poor and just because they're minority, these kids can't succeed. Given the right kind of faculty, giving the right kind of support, the ratios are the same as everywhere else in the district when it comes to the teachers, but it's having, from the custodian to the people that work in the cafeteria, everybody is focused on those kids being ready to learn when they leave that school and go to 3rd grade. And the results are just stunning when you even compare them to our own district. I mean, there are 40% differences between Dallas ISD and these kids. And even though district-wide, our early childhood program is all mandatory, has to be class. It has to be a top class, top quality early childhood program, or we won't invest in it. And in those schools, we're also seeing these 20, 30% differences between kids that were in our preschool and kids that are coming from other preschools. So we can, if we invest the dollars in the right place, focused on quality and accountability, do what's right for the kids in Dallas ISD. Now, for other communities, I'm sorry, I can't help you, but I can tell you what we're doing. It really is. Come and visit us. Come and see what we're doing. Our English language learners are about at the state now. Our gap is almost not negligible. It's still there. But it is pretty stunning what we've been able to do.
I think this issue of how to structure funding at the state level is certainly one that the School Finance Commission has been struggling with, and we will probably see a report from them sometime soon. But I know that the expenditures subgroup has come out with their recommendations, and a lot of the discussion was, hearing from folks about programs that worked and talking about whether to direct funds to those particular programs, so a more purposeful way of structuring funding. But it's just hugely complicated by the fact that our entire school finance system needs to be re-examined, and it's very complex, and so it's really hard to say at this point, you know, what's going to result from all that and what we're going to be left with in terms of funding for any particular type of initiative.
Yeah, I would totally agree with all of those things that everyone said. I think funding for full-day kindergarten is a prerequisite. Expanding pre-K is another one. To the point earlier that I made, like the state is seeing lower growth of salaries for early career teachers, and I think it'd be worthwhile to reverse that trend. I think it would pay off in terms of retention rates. And then targeting any additional dollars to places that need it the most. Where are the places with the highest turnover rates, the lowest performance? I think those dollars on English learners and students with disabilities would pay off dividends in the long run.
I agree with all those things. Do we have time for questions? I'm sorry? One or two? Okay. Yes, sir.
Dave Johnson, Transport and Consulting. Forgive me if my questions seem convoluted. Congratulations, Dallas, impressive program. Can any of you speak of research regarding the relationship between merit pay and retention? Let me explain. What you described with Dallas almost sounds circular, and the note I made to myself was, is it the chicken or the egg? We know that with correlational research, it shows only relationship between A and B. It does not show causation. So how do we know whether the merit pay system at Dallas is adding to retention, or is it that people are retained or staying because they like to be there and they like the school system and like the work? How do we know? Could any of you speak to the relationship between, the correlational relationship between merit pay and teacher retention?
I think that's a great question, and I welcome anybody to come and visit what we're doing in Dallas and learn about TEI and how it's designed and how it was built. Is it correlational? Can I tell you with 100 degree, P of 0.005 that these teachers are staying because of the merit pay and because we're paying them $90,000 a year? I can't answer that question right now. We're only in our 4th year of the system. So, to really have robust data, you have to have enough numbers to be able to show that. Now, I can tell you what's happening in the classroom, and I can tell you of the other attrition rate. We talk about retention rate. Let's talk about attrition. Not all attrition is the same. And I can show you the data from the last 3 years now, where when we look at our attrition, almost 90% of our attrition is in our unacceptable category. So if you're a student in Dallas ISD, if you're one of my children that was in Dallas ISD, to me, that was a fantastic day. Because we know that those individuals have sought careers elsewhere. And we do, and we support them, and we have job fairs. And when we had the bad times in 08 and 09, and there was the recession, and Dallas unfortunately had to lay off a bunch of teachers, we had employers coming to us saying, we want to hire your teachers. And so all those teachers, fortunately, were able to be placed. But I think that if we want to be a great place to work, we need to reward those teachers, make sure that that the great teachers are staying, the ones that have the potential are staying, and the ones that have figured out that maybe this isn't the career for them, that we help them transition into other job opportunities so they can say, you know what, teaching wasn't my thing, but Dallas ISD did what was right for me. But in terms of having that correlation and saying, I can ironclad, gold stamp, no doubt, I'm sure there are a lot of great researchers in the state of Texas that can come and look at our evaluation system and give us that answer.
I, for one, appreciate that question because it does relate back to what I was saying earlier about having an external evaluation establish the strength of the connection between A and B. And before we ever scale up and start saying, well, everyone ought to be doing it this way or incentivizing everyone to do it that way, that's a key data point, piece of evidence that we need. And certainly other systems have been studied. As I said, the RAND Corporation studied the Gates Effective Teaching Initiative and found it not to be particularly effective. So I do think it's worthy of that examination, and you're correct that there is a difference between correlation and causation. But even if you're able to establish a correlation, you can show the strength of that connection, and that can be compelling as well.
If there's strong enough connection.
Exactly.
Well, and may I add, so TEI in Dallas didn't just come out of nowhere. So we had our CEI that has existed for about 20 years before that. So we have been measuring this, and there are studies, actually research studies on our CEI, on the previous system, that then got built into TEI. In fact, the one part of the MET study that we do follow from Gates is the student evaluation, because that is the one part that we had, that the MET study clearly showed the highest correlation. So that's why the student survey is 15%, 1/5 of our evaluation. And having had students that went through the school district, I mean, my first grader knew who the good fourth grade teachers were and who the ones weren't in her school. And I bet you we had pulled up the CEIs, I can guarantee you that they were absolutely right. So from that point of view, I mean, I can't tell you correlation and all that stuff. I can tell you what it looks like, and I can tell you that the drop-off of those individuals who teaching is not their calling, for our kids in Dallas, and I can't tell you that this would be great everywhere. Okay, it works for Dallas, and it works because it has a supportive school board that wants and a supportive superintendent that helped drive the system, that got everybody in the table to build it. Everybody at the table. The extent of their commitment to the project, I can't tell you, but it was a broad base of support: teachers, parents, students, community members, faith community, everybody was at the table when we built it. So I think that's one of the reasons that for Dallas, and again, I can't say it would be perfect for everybody, it works for Dallas.
Yeah, from a teacher's perspective, any compensation system cannot just be based on test scores because there are so many teachers who are not teaching, STAR-tested areas, so there has to be a variety of measures for teachers to buy in on a system being fair and equitable. I mean, you will still have those.
And understandable. That's the other part of it.
Yeah. But I think it should be, up to the particular school or district to figure out, well, what measurements do we want to use to reward teachers and to retain teachers and place them in the areas where we need them the most. You had a question?
Mrs. E, you mentioned the RAND study a couple of times, and I followed that. We spent $575 million, or Gates has spent the money on trying to tie the teacher salaries to the test scores and other versions of value-added models. And if we're going to roll this out statewide, we need to be very careful. You mentioned the Dallas TEI model. It needs to be independently studied, and it needs to be peer reviewed. And you mentioned that the students get to evaluate the teachers. Well, maybe a sweet little first grader will say, who's a good teacher, who's not a good teacher. But the junior high and high school students can absolutely retaliate against their teachers, and that is happening in Dallas ISD. So we need to be very careful promoting something like that gives the students the power to impact the teacher's salary.
So I will answer to that every single one of us that goes to a McDonald's or to a Whataburger every single day impacts that business when we either decide to purchase there or don't decide to purchase there. And the impact that decision making on students and on families has caused that we have over 30,000 students in charter schools now, where perhaps they're being better served or at least have better customer service. So the fact that we're asking our customers, our students, what they believe. Now, we also analyze that data to make sure that the outliers are taken out. First graders are not doing the evaluation. It's only, I think, starting in 5th grade and older, where they actually have understand. Well,
some of my best teachers, I would have given them a terrible
Right, but we account for that in the system, and and the questions and the surveys that are done are completely transparent. We know what they're asking. The school board looks at them. So we know what questions, we've actually taken some questions out because they were a little creepy. Well, we didn't, the people who do the, well, you know, it's like that one of the questions was worded in a way that made it sound, well, you know, I'm the teacher and do you care what happens to the student after they leave the school building? And it was just a little like on the edge of creepy. And so that was one of the questions that got taken out. But it's continually improved. That is a peer reviewed. That is based on data. It's work that Texas A&M did. So we do work with organizations to look at our TI and our.
2 decades to tie teachers' salaries to test scores, and we know it doesn't work.
Well, see, but we say that you say that with such authority. However, since it's never really been tried long term, we don't know if in fact it does or it doesn't work. I can tell you that the student performance in Dallas, in those schools where we have our best teachers, has turned around students and families and communities. Where we have our best teachers at RTEI tells us beyond the shadow of a doubt that these are fantastic teachers that are doing great things for kids. I know that. That is fact. If you want to go into those poor communities in South Dallas and Southeast Dallas and Southwest Dallas where we've turned those families around, I welcome you to come and visit with the students of Blanton and the families of Blanton to know the impact that TEI has had on their students.
I know the impact of
All right.
teachers.
I think there. Do we have any other questions?
Can I jump in real quick? So the way I would answer both these last two questions is that places that have tried to do it in an experimental fashion, that are designed by economists and they're like bonus oriented, they're not permanent, those have generally not produced results, and it's because teachers don't understand them or they don't value them. The places that have been more permanent do have stronger results. So I'd point to a couple. There's a Mathematica study on the talent transfer initiative. There's studies on the District of Columbia Public Schools in DC. There's a study on Denver, and there's a study on the Teacher Incentive Fund that have all found positive results. And I think it's because of this distinction between we're experimenting on teachers versus we're investing in them and making something more permanent.
All right, I think we'll go one more. Kara.
The STAR test, I'm Kara Blue, Texas Public Policy Foundation. TEA reports that the STAR test is the questions are designed and approved by Texas teachers. They actually all align to the Texas curriculum. You can see all the questions online. So I'm just wondering if you'll speak to why it's not appropriate, or if you think it's appropriate to utilize the STAR test in evaluating teacher performance.
Are you talking about the validity study that TEA just completed to validate STAR in terms of it being aligned to the curriculum?
No, I'm actually talking about every STAR question is online and exactly what part of the curriculum it's testing is
Right.
also online.
Mhm.
And also all of the questions are approved by Texas teachers and designed by Texas teachers. So I'm just wondering, you know, when we're saying we shouldn't be using standardized testing, but we're using a test that's designed by Texas teachers and aligns to the Texas curriculum, if there's any objection, you know, what the objection would be to using that as part of a teacher evaluation, as sounds like Dallas is doing.
Well, I think that the question is, was the STAR test validated for the purpose of measuring teacher effectiveness? And I haven't seen that validation study yet. So, I mean, that's the whole crux of it. You know, are you using a measure that was designed for one purpose for something else? And until we know the validity of doing that, I think I think advancing any kind of initiative on that premise is fraught with peril.
Yeah, giving a teacher's perspective, one problem that many teachers have with the STAR test is it's an achievement test, so it's to see where students are at the end of any given year. But I know they have a growth measure included in the accountability, but it's not given at the beginning of the year, then given at the end of the year, so we can see within that particular school year how much growth a student made, and you know, this from grade level to grade level, and on any given day that a student takes a standardized test, I mean, the data that gets that is spit out, you know, might not be relevant. So star data from a teacher's perspective, if that's the only measure you're using to incentivize teachers, is very problematic. But can you use it to demonstrate that someone has done something in the classroom? I think you can to a certain extent, especially if you can compare apples to apples, I would say. So if I'm teaching the same content area as another teacher, and we have a similar demographic of students, you can maybe see like some effectiveness between teachers there. But to compare myself to a teacher that's teaching, so I teach in San Antonio ISD on the west side, to compare what I do with a teacher in Alamo Heights is just not fair, on a standardized assessment. So.
I'm sorry, the key word is validity. And there are different types of validity, and you must match it to the construct you're trying to measure.
Yeah.
Right, and the CEI, for example, the one that we developed, there's actually a University of Chicago study on our CEI that looks at this exact issue, because the CEI, the Classroom Effectiveness Index that Dallas has had forever, does actually take into account the demographics of your students, where they were before. Are they English language learners? Are they at risk? And the problem is that as soon as you start adding all those variables, it adds complexity, and people say, well, I don't get it. I don't understand it. Okay, but the people who understand statistics and the people who understand what the design is behind it will understand that the more variables you add, the more fair it is. On the other hand, the more variables you add, you actually make it harder to understand. And so our current TI system is actually, I think, a pretty good balance, and people could disagree with me, absolutely, but at least the study that was done, the CEI on the precursor, is very, very strong. Be glad to get your card and send it to you. But there's no doubt. I mean, our evaluation is only 35%. But the question that was asked originally, these were Texas teachers who have vetted these questions. I'm glad that they're transparent and out in the open. They used not to be. I think that transparency and letting people understand. So it was really funny. So the Morning News did this deal where they surveyed every school board trustee in the North Dallas area. And they asked them to take a sample of STAR test, of end of course exam questions. And you know how many trustees actually tried to do it? Out of the 100, 200 or so trustees, I think there were only like 14 of us that actually.
How'd you do?
So I got a perfect score, but I have to admit I had an unfair advantage. So 3 questions had to do with biology, and my PhD is in molecular biology. And 3 questions were law questions. And my law degree is from the University of Texas School of Law. So I had an unfair advantage, and I was reading these questions, I was like, oh, come on. But in a sense, I'm actually a subject matter expert on 2 of those areas, so so using me as an example is not a good example. But I think only like 3 other trustees got a perfect score, and then it was kind of down for. I should never say this out loud, but I've actually threatened at some point that maybe we should pass legislation that requires all our legislators to have passed the end of course exams. But, I'll keep that to myself so that it's not on the mic and, it's not all over the internet.
I'm sure I'll get about 15, 20,000 phone calls tomorrow about that. But with that, I think we're about out of time.